All right. Well, kia ora, everyone. We'll get underway, I think. My name's Stephen Moe, and we're going to have another session. I think this might be week number 8. It's hard to believe, or meeting number 8. But for those of you who haven't joined before, in the first half, we're going to have a few sector updates, hear from some people with different perspectives. And then in the second half, what we'll do is split into breakout rooms and have smaller group discussions that we can then feed back to everybody. And I'm getting lots of feedback from people who aren't able to join the calls, but are really appreciating the summaries that are going out. So I think it's fulfilling a role. I know for today in particular, because of the budget being announced, there's several briefings and other events happening around this time. So I've had a number of people say I can't make it because of this other, budget briefing or whatever, but we'll just get underway, I think. So the first thing is just to report back, we have set up this Slack channel. So some of you have joined that. If anybody else is interested, I'll send the details in the next update. There's almost 30 of you on the Slack channel. So far, there hasn't been a huge volume of posts, but it might be that you need to change your settings to see when other people post, and then you'll get updates. But there's definitely been 1 or 2 collaborations I've noticed where someone in Christchurch posted about something they were working on, and then somebody else said, I'd love to know more, and now they're connecting. So it's a chance for us to connect offline apart from these meetings. And the other thing is the IRD approached me and said they'd like to speak to this group next week about the support that they're providing in terms of business support and the loans and things that they're looking at. So I said, that's great, no problem. So they're going to come along next week and talk about some of the support that IRD is providing, and particularly asking if there's any questions from not-for-profits and community sector, how they can make it clear. So I'll make sure to send information about that so people know that that's coming. And then I've asked 2 people to just give us some sector updates. So the first is Michelle Kitney from Volunteering New Zealand, and then Ros Rice as well from Community Networks Aotearoa. So Michelle, I'll just hand over to you. This is a chance for us to hear a different voice, a different sector's perspective, what's going on. And I have to say, at every single call, volunteering comes up as a theme. What does this mean for the future of volunteering? So I'd be really interested in your thoughts, what you're seeing, what you're working on. So over to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And yeah, I'm Michelle Kitney I'm the Chief Executive of Volunteering New Zealand. I have been in some of these calls, but at other times I've been just a little bit busy, as you can imagine. But I do remember back to one of basically the first 2 where Sarah Doherty, her sort of sector update was basically be kind and take it easy on ourselves. And that's really stuck with me as it's been hard to stick to at times, but in terms of taking it easy. Yeah, I think the collective wisdom and sharing and collaboration in this group is awesome, and yeah, keeps us stronger. So Volunteering New Zealand is the peak body for volunteering. We represent both volunteers and volunteering organisations that involve volunteers. Possibly one of the reasons why volunteering is coming up so much is because actually it's integrated across all of our sectors within the community and charity sector. We have 115,000 charities and community organisations, as you'll probably all know, but the stats show us that actually 90% of those organisations don't employ anyone, so they're all run by volunteer effort, mahi aroha, social action. Yeah, so volunteering has been really at the forefront of the response across many sectors. It's also been quite a busy time in terms of communication to get key information about all sorts of stuff around essential services and guidelines out. So we've been working quite a lot with the National Crisis Management Centre and the Volunteer Centre Network just to provide guidance and disperse guidance as well. And to that note, we've just received 2 guidelines today, one for volunteers and one for organisations that use volunteers, that have come out of the, it seems to keep changing its mind. So now I believe it's called the Office of Central Command, which sounds quite Stalinist to me, but yeah, that's the new name, and we've got the guidelines. So I'll drop them into the chat. We've sort of dispersed them out, and I think obviously my experience of the information coming out around level 2 is it's taken a lot more time to get it out, because there's a lot more stuff for I guess the government and the sectors to sort out. So it's possible we may still see more guidance coming out, or clarifications. I think it's possible we might hopefully see a set of FAQs for the community and voluntary sector around volunteer involvement. So one of the things that I've really loved about the last few weeks is that we've been interacting with quite a lot of different organisations, because there has been a lot of activity happening across the sector, and so I'd really welcome further connections and discussions about any challenges or ideas or collaborations you might see around the volunteering space. There's been obviously a flurry at the start of lockdown of like mutual aid sites being created, not necessarily being able to operate particularly well given the alert level conditions, but obviously there's been a hive of kind of thinking about infrastructure around volunteering. So love to talk more with anyone if you've got any thoughts around that. I know there's not a lot of time to go into too much detail here today, but just saying I'm very happy to keep talking. And I think one of the things that stood out for me is that we've, like a lot of those organisations have found real value in actually being able to draw on our research and I guess the long knowledge that we hold around volunteering and volunteering best practice. So that's been quite good. So I think, you know, there's been a few challenges but also opportunities around volunteering. It's still quite hard to say what the volunteer supply landscape will look like into the future, in my view. But we do know that throughout the last kind of 6 weeks, there's been a real awareness and a kind of a groundswell of people wanting to help, which is really awesome. So we want to make sure that that is acknowledged, and it has been balanced against the fact that there haven't necessarily been heaps of roles for people putting up their hand through the different alert levels. So, but we know that there will be a greater demand for volunteers as we come out of into recovery or into new normal. Another challenge has obviously been, or a challenge opportunity, is I guess shifting from moving things to remote opportunities, and these sort of things, like we've seen some of that happen through alert level 4 and 3, which has been really awesome, but there's still probably a lot more opportunities to figure out ways to engage a greater range of volunteers into not-for-profit operations potentially, but all of that still takes volunteer management and work and effort. So I think the role of the volunteer manager and the infrastructure that supports onboarding will be important to focus on as we come out of into new normal. One of the challenges, so the definition of volunteering is for the common good, of your own volition and without financial reward. And you know, that's a particularly Western framing of it. Expressions of volunteering and look different in different cultures, you know, there's not a lot of time to go into all of that here, but there's always, you know, we can always talk differently and more inclusively about volunteering. But I think just focusing on that definition for a moment and looking at stuff that's happening overseas, there's a real kind of a bit of blurring between volunteering for the common good and volunteering for a business happening overseas. So couple of examples overseas that have just come up, and this is on the radar of a lot of the peak bodies and organisations internationally. So I've been having some conversations with them, and they've been flicking me examples. So Boots has been recruiting volunteers to do COVID testing for a service that, they're a business, and it's a business function, and they don't have enough people to do it, so they decided to recruit volunteers for it, which isn't actually volunteering. And another example is a university overseas in a country very near us has decided it has to cut staffing by 40%, so it's trying to find volunteers to run its lectures. And I mean, we haven't seen the same levels of, I guess, furlough, and potentially not yet seen the same level of reductions to some organisations in terms of cash flow and staffing levels that we might see into the future. So I guess it's keeping alive our understanding of what actually is volunteering and what is unpaid labour that's, or breach of employment law. That's really boring and a bit kind of, Sorry, I want to maybe just finish on the opportunity. So I've already talked about the opportunity around better remote or virtual volunteering. That's a real interesting piece, and I know that the Volunteer Centre Network are thinking about how they can support the not-for-profits that they work with to do that better and different. But it's, probably a lot more thinking to go on there to really amplify that opportunity. I think the key awesome opportunity is just the awareness of volunteering and also the wider community sector, and kind of grasping that and making the most of it. So we have National Volunteer Week in June, and the theme for us this year is Te Hua o Te Mahitahi, so the benefit of working together. And it's an opportunity for organisations to celebrate their volunteers, but I think this year I really want to emphasise the fact that it's the opportunity for us to celebrate even more widely, for everybody to celebrate volunteers and the community sector more widely, who've really been champions through this time. And also I really like the language around the team of 5 million, because to me that speaks to the fact that, well, it reflects the fact that we are all potentially able to contribute to something to our community, be it volunteering, mahi aroha, or social kind of I guess activism, or whatever you want to call it. So we're all able to be volunteers. So but I'm very happy to talk offline if people have technical questions about volunteering, volunteers, or any awesome ideas. So
Really, I was
going to try and not talk too long, so I'll stop there.
No, that's perfect. There's a question that's come up in the chat. Maybe if you don't mind looking.
I'll have a look.
It's just Anne is asking, can you reiterate the definition of volunteering, which you've just stated?
So I paraphrase that. So there's, it's basically for the common good, of your own volition and without financial reward. I think when you think about it from other cultures' perspectives more broadly, of your own volition, so cultural obligations may not be of your own volition, but I think when I think about my volunteering, it's of my own volition, but I feel pretty obligated to do a lot of it. So, but we have those definitions, and I can provide more information about that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think that it's helpful for all of us, because not all of us are focused so much on volunteering itself. It definitely helps to hear your voice, particularly representing so many other organizations. So that would be good. Michelle, I seem to remember as well, a couple of weeks ago, there was talk about a survey that you were conducting or involved with. Has that happened now, or what? Any update there? So
we've got one on our site that's still open. It's about to close for our voluntary sector and volunteers. There's a question about the average age of volunteers. I'll answer that offline. I have to get my research person to get the actual data on that. So the research hasn't been processed by my researcher at the moment. We've all been quite busy. She has been working through another piece of research that we did, which is just basically taking sector updates from a range of stakeholders. So we've produced 2 reports on those already, and they're available on our website, but I can drop them into the chat or email them through. And we are also working collaboratively with Huia Social Service, Social Centre for Social Impact and Philanthropy New Zealand on a COVID-related survey, which will be sent out later. And ComVoices, I believe, is about to restart the research that it does annually on the community sector as well.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
But I can see another question. Do you think there will be a move? It's a good question, Amanda Rose, and I think yeah, I guess I think you always need to be thinking about how all of us will be thinking about doing our business differently, and how, you know, there is opportunity to engage volunteers. Sorry, I should have read the question out. So basically the question is, do you think there will be a move for organisations needing to restructure and utilise skilled volunteers to take on administrative tasks because of the financial impact of COVID in the long term? Possibly. And I guess I don't think we want to, you know, like volunteer roles, if you belong to our volunteer centre network or you are a member of FINZ, one of the things you kind of sign up to is not replacing a paid role with a volunteer role. But at the same time, there may, you know, if you think of volunteering as being up to the person who engages it as part of the decision of what that looks like and what they get out of it, some people might actually want to do volunteering in an administrative role, and that might suit the organisation. But I guess, yeah, there are some things to balance up about how you do that. Yeah, so I don't think there's any job that you can't get a volunteer to do, basically. So that would be the sort of, I guess, the philosophical answer to that question. But at the same time, you'd still need to be careful about how you restructure things and whether you're bringing a volunteer in to do something that was paid for in the past.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, that's really good. And yeah, if you can put in some links or send me the email with some links, and then we can put it in the summary that goes out, because I think I've mentioned in the emails, but there's now 180 people getting the emails. Even so right now it looks like there's 31 people on the call, but there's a whole bunch of other people who can't make it for whatever reason, but they appreciate the information. So we'll keep.
I will email you.
That'd be great.
Easier than being in the links.
Yeah, perfect. And then I mentioned the IRD. I just thought I'd read out what Stuart Donaldson said to me, because he sent me an email saying he couldn't make this call. And what he wants to talk about next week, or one of his team, is the small business loan scheme. And he just said, hold on a second. Yeah, there's a 1 month window. So if you want to remind people on the call to go to our webpage, if they think it might be right for them, then go ahead. We appreciate that if a not-for-profit takes up a loan, you're likely to want to discuss it at a board level or with your trustees beforehand to approve the application. So 1 month window is not a long time. There is a possibility the 1 month will be extended, but we won't know that until later. So you need to apply via My IR. So not-for-profits will need to make sure the appropriate people can access My IR to make the application. So yeah, that's just so that we're on the same page about what we'll talk about the next time. So Ros, do you mind giving us an update? You're involved with something which has such a cool name, the Network of Networks, and it's worth just hearing from you, you know, what you're seeing or what's happening at that level, or yeah, just keen for an update from Community Networks Aotearoa. Thank you.
First off, just in a quick response to Michelle, some years ago there was some really good research done called Mahi Aroha over volunteering in Māori communities that talked about the difference in cultural attitude towards, you know, just piling in and helping your whānau. So just threw that up. And also just to mention, when we're talking about research, Liz Davies, who's here on our call, she's the CEO of Social Link in Tauranga, and they've just done an amazing piece of research on how COVID-19 has affected the Western Bay of Plenty. And I think that basically you can say that this research could be extrapolated to say this is probably how it's affected NGOs throughout New Zealand. So I really recommend to you all that you shoot onto Social Link's website and pick up Liz's amazing research. Social Link does incredible research, so I just wanted to add that. And I think, Tess will correct me if I'm wrong, the ComVoices survey is every 2 years, I think. Not annually, it's every 2 years, yeah. Regarding the Network of Networks, it's actually split into two now, and I'm not on the actual agencies part. There's now a side of it that is based on sort of welfare, and I'd like to introduce you to Jeanne Rogers, who's also on our call, and she's waving at you. And if there's anything you want to add, you just jump in, Jeanne. But Jeanne has been seconded over to do work on the second group that I'm in now, which is to do with welfare issues. And we've just come out of a meeting right now. The update that I can give you is that it was a really good meeting. I think it was one of the better ones I've been to be honest, because they really did do a bit of focusing on some of the NGO issues that are close to all our hearts. There is a real focus at the moment on transition from level 2 into level 1 and then into normal life, but specifically about what's happening in the regions. And I think it's really important for us to remember that the regions outside of the regions have really had a lot of specific issues that are different from what are experienced probably by agencies out of Wellington. So it's good that they're actually starting to look at regional stuff. And they're also very interested about what happens when civil defence and emergency management start standing down, what's going to happen in those regions. Just looking here, Jeanne and I are particularly interested in what we call, or the title of, invisible communities. And those are the small service providers who are not connected to government. The government's not really aware of what's the story with them. And they're interested in hearing stories so that government can look at ways, or Civil Defence and Emergency or NEMA or whoever does it, can look at ways of supporting those small communities. So if anybody here has got any stories that they'd like to send to me about what, you understand what I mean by invisible communities, the small community groups that aren't necessarily getting funded by government, but are working their butts off. They're getting funded through local government, philanthropy, fundraising events, but they're not on the radar and they need help. So I want to know all the stories that you can give me about those organisations so that I can take this through to Jeanne and to a specific group that's been gathered for me to share that information to quite soon. And
can I add to that, Ed, as well?
Sorry, Jeanne?
Can I add to that as well? So one of the things in the operational control centre is that we've through data we've identified 3 tiers of communities. It's the ones that are connected to government already, the ones that are newly unemployed, the families that are really struggling that government can see, and there's also the layer beneath that, which are the people who were already invisible to government and continue to be invisible to government, and they're the people that we want to connect through service providers, because and this is the smaller service providers, because we have a lot of providers who have set themselves up during lockdown, and they are very closely connected to communities, those invisible communities. And it's not so much us connecting with those invisible communities, but it's connecting to the people that are supporting those invisible communities. And that's the reason why we're really focused on making sure that we can in some way continue to support those community providers who have basically set themselves up but are not sustainable, because they've all got their own families and they're all very tired, very stressed, and very they're emotionally impacted by what they've had to do over the last sort of 7 weeks, which they do it with love and what a lot of Māori Pacific people do. We just do the mahi. But a lot of them aren't sustainable. We want to make them sustainable, so we need to hear their stories. We need to take them to our governance group and say, we need to support these people, because it's we're not going to, even though we're going to level 2, most of those communities are still in level 4. So so that's the reason why this group is so critically important, because we're already going through transition into recovery while still doing response, which is a really difficult thing to do, because being in response and being in recovery is going to overload the system, basically, because everyone's trying to do their business as usual. They're trying to do response, and they're also trying to go into recovery, and that's no easy feat at all.
Yeah, thanks, Jeanne. Oh, and I just want to also say, which I meant to say before and I completely forgot, that Tess Casey, who's also on this call, is wave, Tess. She's also on this group too, so it's not just me. And there was quite a conversation about listening and supporting these groups, a focus on how to keep to get these connections, and then how to keep them going so that these organisations can get support in some way or another. There was conversations also about the kind of comms that need to go out to NGOs, and someone suggested a survey, and I did pass on that everybody has got survey fatigue. So there's conversations also about whether sometimes it's just better to try and do face-to-face things with people. So it's really great to see this organisation starting to think a little bit more in depth about how they best support and communicate with NGOs. We'd also had quite a deep dive into situations for Pacific Island communities. That was really great. So yeah, I'm now on the welfare group with Jeanne and with Tess, and I thought the meeting today was really helpful, and it's really good to see, pardon me, it's really good to see that there is some consideration being given to many of those little groups who have basically run out of resources and run out of support, and we all know about them. So once again, please remember to send me any stories you've got. But I'd just like to take a moment to respond to the budget. May I?
Yeah, that's fine. And that will actually frame it nicely, because in the breakouts, I was hoping that that would be one of the themes that the team, the groups can talk about. So please go ahead. Okay, so government is very happy to be able to say that they have put about $32 million extra dollars into food collection or food through responding to the increase in the demand for food. And I'm just looking at it here. They say they're investing $36 million in grants for community groups to enhance the well-being of their local communities in COVID. And I want to say, great, but that's not much money. So I don't want to knock government, because I know everybody is calling on government for money, and I know that this is a budget designed to get our country going again and everything like that. But I want to just remind you all, in 2008, the Labour government under Helen Clark put in an investment of $446 million over 4 years to support our sector. And so this pales in significance to that. And I think that government may have to experience a few people knocking on their door after a period of time wanting even more money, because our sector is really fairly direly in financial straits after many, many years of non-investment in us. So really grateful for what they've done and the thought that they've put into it, and how they've, the boosts that they've given to family violence and food producers and all the different areas that they've put money into. I'm just saying, I don't think that's going to last long,
and that although I'm totally grateful for it, 36 million in the overall scheme of things is not a lot of cash, and that's a bit disappointing for me. But you know, hey, our organisation got a slight increase, so I better not complain too much. Thank you, Liz.
Well, that's good. Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who's contributed. It was great to have those questions and to hear these sector updates, because I just think part of the main purposes of this call is just to hear different perspectives, because we all get so focused on what we're working on, and it's good to remember that there's other people out there doing different things in different areas. So thanks, everybody. So now what I do for those of you new to the call is I send you to breakout rooms, because the call is too big for all of us to be able to say something. But if there's only 4 or 5 or 6 of you in a room, then you'll be able to have a discussion. And then, as usual, if you can appoint a scribe who can then report back by email to me, I'll put it in the email that goes out to the wider group. And also, if that person can report back when you come back from the breakout rooms. And I guess carrying on from what you've just said, Ros, you know, obviously the budget came out. What are we thinking about it? What are we feeling? Is there anything that's an immediate action point that we could take as a group? I know we sent the letter to the Prime Minister now about a month ago. I'm wondering, should we be sending something as a group, or is somebody else, do we know someone else is doing that? I'm keeping an eye on Canada and the UK and Australia, and they've got open letters to the government that different sector groups are sending and things. So it's quite interesting, and I think it can be a useful tool. I think with our one, with hindsight, by addressing it to the Prime Minister and copying it to 4 ministers, it may have gotten lost in the cracks of bureaucracy. I got an email back from the Prime Minister's office saying it had been passed to Minister Williams' office, but then I was in touch with Minister Williams' office, who said that they hadn't received that. So it's an example, I guess, of government in multiple levels. So maybe we could be a bit more refined if we did write something. But equally, we may feel as a group that's not necessary right now. I'm just raising it as an example of what you might want to discuss in your groups. So I'll send you away now. I think there's, about 25 of you. So maybe we'll just do 4 or 5 groups. And then if you can report back in about 15 minutes, that would be really good. So you have to click join to join the group. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your discussions and everything is solved. So what we could do, if one representative of each group, if you don't mind just going around and giving us a brief update on the key points that you talked about. And if that person can put a summary in an email to me, I'll make sure that it goes out to the wider group. And also, before I forget, if any of you have other updates, the chat's been really good today. If you have other updates or links that you think would be helpful for people, feel free to send those separately. They don't have to relate to anything you talked about in your group. But yeah, if one of you don't mind going ahead and sharing.
I'm happy to kick off if that's okay. And certainly anyone else in my group, if I've missed anything, feel free to jump in. In our group, we had Mark, Marcus, Karen, and myself. I spoke briefly about the 57 million increase in the ODA budget overseas, which some commentators within our sector have noted is not as great a increase as given that, sorry, what am I trying to say? The 50 or so million really is, to some interpret it as supporting New Zealand's own infrastructure overseas to develop aid, to deliver aid rather than going to communities as such. But we as an international aid sector acknowledge it's a really difficult ask in the current environment to expect the government to increase ODA overseas. So we've been a little bit reticent in that. In our group, we did talk, just on that note, we did talk briefly about how can we look at the problems we're facing a little bit more regionally rather than just domestically, particularly when you're talking about migrant workers and supporting Pacific communities, not just in New Zealand, but acknowledging that those communities extend into the Pacific, and it's all one community as well, including ourselves as part of Polynesia. In terms of comments on the budget, feeling that it supports the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff and not a lot of community development support within it. How can we get more money into community-led development and support for volunteers, and how we might be able to link those community organisations to strengthen the links with essential social infrastructure. Local government needs to be getting more resources, and again, not investing enough, and there's not enough investment into community development. And so we were thinking about what are the implications of council budget, a lack of funding to local council, and what is the implications of that onto community groups, particularly around environmental concerns and education. And a last point I want to make, what I thought was a really awesome one. Lots of focus in the budget around conservation, docklands, and the like, but not a lot of focus on community urban spaces, particularly in small towns and smaller settlements. Yes, so hopefully I did my group justice, but that's me.
Great. Sounded good to me. Do you want to go to the next group?
I can go next. So mostly we ignored your instructions, and we talked about volunteers. So a lot of concern about the volunteer work and a tension between the risk of volunteers returning to work, but older people wanting to return. So, you know, how to keep them safe, but they're really wanting to come back. And then following on from that, keeping them engaged if they can't come back to volunteering until they can come back on board. Dennis had just been to a meeting about the older workforce, and he might like to jump in and talk about that, but the workforce is getting a lot older. Engaging younger volunteers for essential services. So our group was Dennis, Adrian and Michelle, and Adrian talked about how St John's, people couldn't drive their vehicles because they were older. So how to engage younger people to volunteer for essential services. And then Michelle talked about the barriers to volunteering. So for lots of people, it's very hard to volunteer. And so talking about a compensation maybe for costs incurred, so people aren't, and there are other barriers. We talked about more multicultural people volunteering, and how we as Pākehā New Zealanders, or New Zealanders as a whole, welcome them into volunteering. And hot off the press, or coming soon off the press, will be Volunteering New Zealand State of the Sector report. So they're going to publish that in June. We did get to the budget just right at the end. So we talked a little bit about what the government can do to support funding volunteers, especially with the unemployment rate and how much that's going to arise, and what people can get out of volunteering. So all those skills that you learn as a volunteer and how they're so essential for a career journey. And just the benefits of volunteering, that they're so mana enhancing. And that's really about us.
That's great.
Can I just add a little clarification around the barriers and so I'm not saying people should be reimbursed for their time, or because that's not part of it. It's actually about if volunteering incurs a cost to the volunteer, then that shouldn't be that should be reimbursed or sorted out between your reimbursement guidelines. Should be the same as staff, really. I think is one way to look at it. So that expenses relating to volunteering don't become a barrier to people, like petrol or things like that.
That's great. Thank you. Dennis, you were mentioned there. Did you want to say anything else? It's fine if not. That's fine. So we'll go on to the next group.
I'll step in here. We had a group with Penny and Liz and Diane, and we forgot to appoint a recorder, but we'll wing it from here. We did talk about the budget, but not specifically the detail from last night. It's much more about the impact of lack of funding for that invisible community sector that we were talking about prior to the breaking out to the groups. There's a sort of a sense that the community ecosystem is getting blitzed, and it's not being recognised very far outside of the community itself. We were concerned about small organisations not having that support from the government because they don't have government contracts, and so how do you tap into any of that sort of process? So yeah, there didn't seem to be a lot of extra funding in the budget that was going to make a difference to the smaller NGOs and community groups that we relate to. We had a bit of a discussion about the letter that was written to the PM and the ministers, and does yelling make a lot of difference? We looked at some of the other organisations that over the last decade have increased their profile by making a lot more noise and comment, but not necessarily achieving a lot, even though their profile might be higher. We sort of looked at the idea that, you know, with collaboration, we often get told that we need to collaborate more together, and we need to be able to do better, work harder. The difficulty we face compared to, say, a retail shop, the harder we work, doesn't make any more money coming in at all. We don't generate income, so the hard work doesn't, you know, might pay off for the community, but it doesn't solve the cash flow issues. So that was something else that was of concern for us, looking across the communities that we serve. And we struggle to get a voice in the mainstream media. You know, if you look at how much tourism's been talked about, how much retail shops have been talked about, takeaway businesses, all that sort of thing, in the last 4 or 5 weeks, compared to how much airtime the community sector's been getting, we're not getting much at all, really. It's starting to see more publicity for food banks and budgeting services, but that's the front line there. Otherwise, we're not getting recognised, and so we're thinking about how we can have a stronger community response. I think that's us, but the others might want to leap in and add some more.
Great. I'll take the silence as being that was a good summary of everything. I agree with you, and I think it would be good in terms of stories to be told. One of the things is, I think reporters, if you can hand them something on a platter, they're more likely to run with it, in my experience. And I think maybe some of us would know reporters, and if we can deliver them a story or information, they might run a story. So maybe it's about circulating and getting the information accessible for the reporters to do more with.
Stephen, we've tried a lot of that through this and not got anywhere, you know, given the full package story. And I do, but you see student volunteering army in every single, you know, it's almost like the kind of connections, or it's just like a misunderstanding of what's really happening. Yeah, I totally agree with the challenges and can't see what the answer is, even if you do provide them with a package. They just don't love it.
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer. In my experience, it's usually down to personal connection, and the reporter likes this particular story, and it's playing with fire, of course, because sometimes stories go a direction you don't expect, and that's happened to me before as well. But an organization like Spinoff Magazine, or sort of slightly off-center, you know, not mainstream media, some of those might be avenues to try. So I'm trying to talk with the people that I know there, and I'll keep doing that. All right, next group.
Steve, it's me, I think. Yeah, we did talk about the budget. Mostly we talked about the budget. There was a feeling, that inevitably the devil's in the detail, and Ros was doing a little bit of a sort of quick dive into the documents that she had looked at. And with a slightly deeper dive, she was kind of resiling from her suggestion that there was 34 million for social services and that it was social development and it was probably a lot less. And one of the complexity of it is that it seems to be subdivided, and there are some amounts that perhaps cross over and some amounts may be double counted, which I guess that many of us that have looked at budgets over the years are probably reasonably used to. So the headline figure isn't always the best guide. She did, however, say there is a blog on the Philanthropy New Zealand site where someone from Philanthropy New Zealand has gone into done a bit of analysis and gone into a bit more detail. So that's probably worth looking at by some of us here. And she also said that she was expecting, she'd been told that that Minister Cepoloni is going to be making some further announcements at the weekend, which will be relevant to our sector, or the sector more broadly. We then talked a little bit more about the loan that was announced a couple of days ago. And the conversation around that kind of, again, Anna, who was one of the members of the group, Anne, I should say, Anne Rodder, used the same analogy that someone else has already used around the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, although suggesting the ambulance had probably broken down as well. That, for a lot of small groups, taking on a loan is not a comfortable or an advisable thing to do. And with that announcement and also the wages announcement, a lot of the messaging isn't particularly clear around it, which inevitably makes it more difficult for smaller groups, less well-resourced groups, groups who are perhaps not used to grappling with these sorts of complexities. So whilst everyone, welcomes the fact that the government seems to be showing an interest in the for-purpose sector, social sector, the volunteer sector, that they perhaps haven't in their previous budgets, we're still not convinced, although there's a certain reticence for people to be too critical, we're still not convinced that we're getting the best support or the ideal support or the optimum support that many of us would like. Anyone want to add to that? Our group was Ros, Anne, Kate, and Jaden.
Okay, we'll take the silence as being the summary was great. Thank you. It's really good. I think I put in the chat, I put a link to Sue McCabe's article, which she just published about 2 hours ago. So if you scroll up, you can see that. And she analyzes, not in huge amounts of detail, so I'm not sure if it's the exact same thing, but she calls on the government to continue dialogue and discussion rather than just making decisions. So I'll try and find the link and post it again as a new one down below. Great. Okay. Well, is there one more group or two more groups? Anyone who's not spoken yet?
Yeah, we had our group. We didn't appoint a scribe either. We just dived straight in. Sorry. So we had
okay.
Jeanne, Catherine, Andrew, and Sue, I think, on our group. So yeah, we spent a bit of time talking about those invisible groups too, and how to identify them and who they were and what their kind of the roles that they've been playing through this, and kind of how to how we might assist Jeanne in her work in trying to identify them and actually get to hear from them. So I think she's gone away hopefully with some a few ideas around that. We also talked about, kind of linked to that, was how do you get, they're often, well, some of them are the groups that have been doing the hard work through this COVID-19 response, often completely under the radar because they're not necessarily funded by a central government organisation. And I know, you know, I can speak from our experience of, you know, a number of our member organisations who have paid coordinators that work for about 25 hours a week, who have since the beginning of this thing been working 40 to 50 hours a week, and there is no way to top up their salaries because there is no contract or contract advisor that you can go back to and sort of say we're working over capacity and to the extent of our demand. So that's where some of the burnout is, and I think that's where some of the resource needs to go into trying to find those groups and get the funding to them. And Catherine and anyone else was in that group. I didn't take particularly any notes at all, so I'm talking off the top of my head, so feel free to add in.
Great, well, thank you. And
I think you've done a very good overview. I mean, it was a very interesting discussion, and I hope worthwhile links have been made too.
And that actually, I should say, that's one of the purposes of these calls, is that through the small group discussions, you're connecting with people you may not have met before, but usually I'm pretty sure you're going to be aligned and there may be opportunities to continue discussions. So it's a good point. Was there one more group? I'm getting lost now. I think there was 5 in total. Maybe we've had all of them. That's good. Well, what we'll do is, if you can email me the summaries, I'll go through and edit up the video and do the little indexing of what was discussed and who shared back the feedback. I've gotten an email from Louise Aitken as well from Akina Foundation, and they're about to release a report called Building New Zealand's Impact Economy, the Opportunity for Economic Recovery After COVID-19. So she said it's fine to send that to this group. So it hasn't been publicly released yet, but she said it's okay to send it. So I'll do that either on Sunday or Monday. And yeah, it's like a PowerPoint with a whole bunch of content and slides and things. So more information. And if any of you have other things you'd like to share, feel free to email them through. And if anybody would like to join the Slack channel and doesn't know how or whatever, just drop me a line and I'll do my best to help you. Does anyone have any last thoughts or things they wanted to say?
Can I just say, Charities Services did a webinar this week. It was our first one that we ever did on Zoom, so we're all remote, 500 people, and we're really interested in hearing what you'd like us to do next. Such a great response. We got 500 enrolled, 500 people turned up and stayed, maybe 490, but that is showing that the sector really want to hear from us. So if you've got ideas on what you need us to talk about, or we can help host one, we're happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful to know. And maybe let us know if you do have one planned for the next coming weeks or months. And yeah. Well, I say this at the end of every call, which is we'll keep doing this while it's helpful. Today, there was more than 30 people that joined. And yeah, I think lots of people can't join, particularly today, because there were various events regarding the budget. But I'm getting feedback, lots of emails from people saying, thank you for the summaries and things. So do continue to send me information, and we'll meet again in a week's time. Even though we're moving through the lockdown stages, I think we'll just keep going the way we are. So thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you.
For the
Very
invitation,
good. Thank
Stephen,
you.
to speak.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.
No problem. Bye.